There is a silent shift that happens in the human mind, one so subtle that most people live their entire lives without ever noticing it. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic moment or a spiritual breakthrough. It arrives quietly, almost shyly, in the absence of something. In the absence of constant eating, in the absence of stimulation, in the absence of noise. And because modern life trains us to fill every gap immediately, this moment passes unnoticed. Yet neuroscience is now confirming what ancient wisdom observed long ago. When the body pauses from eating, the brain does not weaken. It recalibrates, it softens, it returns to balance. For most of human history, fasting was not a wellness trend or a discipline. It was simply part of life. Food was not always available, and the human nervous system evolved to thrive not in constant consumption, but in rhythm. Today, that rhythm is broken. We eat when we are bored, anxious, stressed, lonely, or distracted, and the brain pays the price. Chronic inflammation, elevated cortisol, constant sympathetic nervous system activation, and a mind that never truly rests. What appears as anxiety or restlessness is often a brain that has forgotten how to be still. When fasting begins, the first thing people notice is discomfort. Hunger signals arise. The mind becomes loud. Thoughts race. This is not a failure of fasting. This is the nervous system revealing its conditioning. Neuroscience shows that early fasting activates the amygdala and stress pathways because the brain initially interprets the absence of food as a threat. But something interesting happens if the pause continues gently, without fear. Cortisol begins to drop, insulin levels stabilize, the brain shifts fuel sources, and the noise slowly fades. This is where modern science meets ancient insight. The Buddha spoke of craving as the root of suffering, not because desire itself is wrong, but because unexamined craving keeps the mind in perpetual agitation. Fasting, when approached with awareness, interrupts this loop, not by force, but by observation. The mind begins to witness hunger without immediately obeying it, and in that witnessing, something loosens. Brain imaging studies now show reduced activity in the default mode network during fasting states. This network is responsible for self-referential thinking, rumination, and mental chatter. When it quiets, people report a sense of spaciousness. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer cling. Emotions move through more freely. The body feels lighter, but more importantly, the mind feels less burdened. This is why many people describe fasting not as deprivation, but as clarity, not as weakness, but as strength. The nervous system shifts from constant vigilance into regulation. Parasympathetic tone increases, heart rate variability improves, and the brain begins producing neurochemicals associated with calm focus rather than stress-driven urgency. What ancient meditation traditions understood intuitively, neuroscience now measures precisely. When stimulation decreases, awareness increases. When consumption pauses, perception sharpens. The Buddha did not teach fasting as an extreme practice, but as a support for clarity, a way to reduce the friction between mind and body, a way to hear what is normally drowned out by excess. As fasting continues, the brain enters a more coherent state. Ketone metabolism enhances mitochondrial efficiency. Inflammatory markers reduce. The prefrontal cortex regains influence over impulsive patterns. This is why people often notice emotional regulation improving, reactions slow, patience increases, a quiet confidence replaces mental urgency. But perhaps the most profound change is psychological. In a world built on constant satisfaction, fasting gently teaches the mind that it is safe without immediate gratification. That safety does not come from filling every desire, but from understanding it. This realization alone can dissolve years of unconscious tension. The Buddha once described the mind as a lake. When constantly disturbed, its surface becomes turbulent, reflecting nothing clearly. When allowed to settle, clarity emerges naturally. Fasting, in this sense, is not about control. It is about allowing the waters to become still. And this stillness is not emptiness. It is presence. It is the brain remembering its original rhythm. It is the nervous system returning home. Most people search for peace by adding something new, a new habit, a new practice, a new solution. Fasting reveals a quieter truth. Sometimes peace emerges not by adding, but by subtracting, not by effort, but by pause. This is only the beginning of the journey, because what happens next, as the brain settles deeper into this state, touches memory, emotion, trauma, and healing in ways that modern science is only beginning to understand. And this is where fasting becomes more than a biological process. It becomes a doorway into inner peace.
As the brain settles into this quieter rhythm, something unexpected begins to surface. Not light, not bliss, but awareness. Subtle emotions long buried under routine and stimulation start to rise. Memories appear without force. Old tensions gently announce themselves. This is often the moment people misunderstand fasting. They think something is going wrong. In reality, something deeply intelligent is happening. Neuroscience calls this reduced cognitive suppression. When the brain is no longer busy managing constant digestion and external input, it reallocates energy toward internal processing. The mind finally has the space to feel what it has been avoiding. Stress biology explains this clearly. Chronic eating, especially under emotional stress, keeps cortisol patterns dysregulated. The body remains in a low-grade fight or flight state even when there is no immediate danger. Fasting interrupts this loop. As insulin drops and cortisol stabilizes, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis recalibrates. The nervous system moves from survival into regulation, and when regulation returns, emotions no longer need to hide. This is where fasting begins to calm not just the brain, but the inner narrative. The stories we tell ourselves about urgency, scarcity, and control lose their grip. The mind becomes less reactive, not because problems disappear, but because perception changes. The Buddha described this as seeing things as they are, without distortion. Modern psychology would call it cognitive flexibility, the ability to observe thoughts without becoming them.
Neuroscientists have found that fasting increases gamma-aminobutyric acid activity in certain brain regions, enhancing inhibitory control. In simple terms, the brain becomes better at stopping unnecessary noise. This is why many people report that their thoughts slow down naturally during fasting. Not because they try to meditate, but because the conditions for mental quiet have been created. And in that quiet, something profound happens. The constant identification with thought weakens. You begin to notice that thoughts arise and pass on their own. Hunger thoughts arise, emotional thoughts arise, and yet there is a deeper awareness underneath, untouched. This realization is not philosophical. It is experiential. It is felt in the body as ease. Ancient teachings often spoke of this awareness as the observer, not a separate entity, but a quality of mind when it is no longer crowded. Fasting supports this state not by belief, but by biology. Reduced inflammation in the brain enhances interoceptive awareness. The body communicates more clearly. Subtle signals are no longer drowned out by excess. This is why fasting often brings a sense of inner honesty. Without constant consumption, the mind cannot distract itself as easily. Emotional truths surface gently, asking to be seen. And because the nervous system is calmer, they can be processed without overwhelm. Trauma researchers now understand that healing requires safety. Fasting, when done mindfully, creates a physiological environment of safety. The body is no longer bracing, it is listening. The Buddha spoke of right effort, not as force, but as balance. Too much strain agitates the mind. Too little awareness dulls it. Fasting sits delicately between these extremes. It is an invitation, not a command. When approached with kindness, it teaches the mind that discomfort does not equal danger. This lesson alone rewires deep psychological patterns. Over time, this rewiring becomes visible in behavior. Impulsivity decreases, emotional eating patterns soften, reactivity in relationships reduces. Neuroscience attributes this to improved prefrontal cortex engagement. The brain regains its capacity to pause before reacting. Choice replaces compulsion. Awareness replaces habit. But perhaps the most surprising effect is the return of meaning. In a world overloaded with options, fasting reintroduces simplicity. Food tastes richer after absence. Silence feels nourishing. Small moments regain depth. The mind remembers how to be present without needing to be entertained. This presence is what ancient wisdom always pointed toward. Not escape from life, but intimacy with it. The Buddha never taught withdrawal as an end. He taught clarity as a way to engage life without suffering. Modern neuroscience now confirms that clarity emerges when the brain is allowed to rest from excess. As fasting deepens, neural repair mechanisms activate. Autophagy increases, damaged proteins are cleared, mitochondrial efficiency improves. But parallel to this physical cleansing, a psychological cleansing occurs. Old emotional residues lose their charge. The mind feels lighter, not because problems are solved, but because they are no longer carried unnecessarily. This is the calm people speak of, not excitement, not numbness. A grounded calm that feels steady and trustworthy. A calm that does not depend on external conditions. This is inner peace, not as an idea, but as a physiological state. And yet, this calm is fragile if misunderstood. Fasting is not about pushing further, harder, longer. It is about listening more carefully. The Buddha warned against extremes because extremes create tension. Neuroscience echoes this truth. When fasting becomes aggressive, the stress response returns. When it remains gentle, regulation deepens. The real transformation does not come from how long one fasts, but from how consciously one pauses. Awareness is the catalyst. Without awareness, fasting is just abstention. With awareness, it becomes insight. And insight changes everything. Because once the brain experiences this state of quiet clarity, it remembers. Even when eating resumes, the nervous system knows a different baseline is possible. The mind begins to seek stillness naturally, not as escape, but as home. In the next phase of this journey, we'll explore how this state influences aging, emotional healing, and long-term mental resilience. Because what fasting awakens in the brain does not end when the fast ends. It reshapes how the mind meets life itself. As the nervous system adapts to this calmer baseline, the effects begin to extend beyond the immediate experience of fasting and into the deeper architecture of the brain. This is where time itself seems to slow. People often describe a subtle change in how they relate to aging, memory, and identity. Neuroscience explains this through neuroplasticity. When stress signals reduce and inflammation quiets, the brain becomes more capable of reshaping itself. New neural connections form more easily. Old, rigid pathways soften. The mind becomes less defined by past patterns and more open to the present moment. Aging, as modern science now understands, is not simply the passage of years. It is the accumulation of cellular stress, metabolic imbalance, and unresolved emotional load. Fasting addresses all three simultaneously. On a biological level, fasting activates autophagy, the body's process of clearing damaged cells and proteins. In the brain, this translates into cleaner signaling and improved synaptic efficiency. On a psychological level, fasting reduces the mental friction caused by constant desire and overstimulation. And emotionally, it creates the safety required for old burdens to release. Epigenetics adds another layer to this understanding. Lifestyle signals influence gene expression, determining which genetic programs are activated or silenced. Fasting sends a powerful signal of efficiency and repair. Genes associated with longevity, stress resistance, and neural protection become more active. But these genetic shifts are not isolated from experience. They are mirrored in perception. The mind begins to feel less rushed, less pressured by time. A quiet confidence emerges, rooted not in control but in trust. The Buddha emphasized trust in the process of awakening, not as blind faith but as experiential knowing. Fasting cultivates this trust. Each cycle reinforces the understanding that the body and mind possess an innate intelligence, that they know how to heal when interference is reduced. This realization alone can dissolve years of fear-based behavior. As fasting becomes integrated rather than isolated, people notice changes in how they relate to food itself. Eating becomes intentional rather than automatic. Gratitude replaces compulsion. This shift alters the brain's reward circuitry. Dopamine sensitivity improves. Pleasure becomes cleaner, less dependent on excess. The mind learns to enjoy without clinging. This is why fasting often leads to emotional sobriety. Feelings are felt fully, but they no longer overwhelm. The nervous system can move through emotional states without getting stuck. Trauma researchers refer to this as increased window of tolerance. The range of experience the nervous system can handle without dysregulation expands. Fasting contributes to this expansion by repeatedly exposing the system to mild stress within a safe container. The result is strength without strain. Ancient texts often speak of liberation as freedom from suffering, not freedom from experience. Neuroscience echoes this wisdom. Suffering arises when the brain is locked into rigid patterns of reaction. Fasting introduces variability. It reminds the system that change is survivable, that discomfort can pass, that calm can return. As these lessons accumulate, identity begins to shift. The mind is no longer defined by cravings, habits, or emotional reactivity. A quieter sense of self emerges, one rooted in awareness rather than impulse. This shift is subtle, but profound. Life feels less like something happening to you, and more like something you are participating in consciously. This conscious participation is the foundation of inner peace. Not withdrawal from the world, but engagement without entanglement. The Buddha's path was never about escaping life. It was about seeing clearly within it. Fasting, when understood properly, supports this clarity at the level of the nervous system. As the brain learns this state, it begins to carry it forward. Even outside of fasting, the mind recalls the feeling of stillness. It becomes easier to return to it. Stressors no longer hijack the system as completely. Aging feels less like decline and more like refinement. In the final part of this journey, we'll explore how this refined awareness translates into daily life, relationships, purpose, and lasting inner peace. Because the true measure of any practice is not how it feels in isolation, but how it transforms the way we live. As this refined awareness begins to integrate into daily life, something subtle yet profound shifts in how the world is experienced. Ordinary moments carry more weight. Conversations feel slower, more intentional. The mind no longer rushes to fill silence. It rests in it. This is not withdrawal from life, but a deeper arrival into it. Neuroscience would describe this as improved present moment processing. A state where the brain's attentional networks are no longer fragmented by constant internal noise. Ancient wisdom simply called it being awake. Fasting at this stage is no longer a technique. It becomes a reference point. The nervous system remembers what balance feels like. Even when food returns, even when life becomes busy again, the body carries an imprint of stillness. Stress no longer floods the system as quickly. Emotional waves rise, but they pass without pulling the mind under. This is inner peace, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived physiological reality. The Buddha taught that peace is not found by arranging the world perfectly, but by understanding the mind's relationship to experience. Modern psychology echoes this insight. Suffering intensifies when we resist what is present. Peace emerges when resistance softens. Fasting trains this softening gently, repeatedly, without force. Hunger arises, and instead of reacting immediately, awareness remains. This same awareness later meets frustration, grief, or uncertainty. And because the nervous system has learned safety and pause, the mind does not collapse. Over time, this changes relationships. Reactivity decreases, listening deepens, the need to be right loosens. Neuroscience attributes this to improved emotional regulation and reduced limbic dominance. In simpler terms, the brain becomes less defensive. The heart feels safer to open. Compassion arises not as a moral effort, but as a natural response when fear subsides. Aging, too, is experienced differently. Instead of a constant sense of loss, there is a growing intimacy with time. The brain, supported by reduced inflammation and improved metabolic health, maintains clarity longer. Memory feels less burdened by emotional charge. Identity becomes more fluid. The Buddha spoke of aging as a teacher, not an enemy. Fasting allows the nervous system to receive that teaching without panic. Perhaps the most meaningful change is how purpose is felt, not as something to chase, but as something that reveals itself when the mind is quiet enough to notice. When consumption slows, perception sharpens. What matters becomes clearer. What does not matter falls away on its own. This clarity is deeply calming. Life no longer feels like a problem to solve, but a process to participate in. Neuroscience now understands that meaning itself is a regulatory signal. When the brain perceives coherence between values, actions, and inner state, Stress chemistry reduces, the body relaxes. Fasting contributes to this coherence by stripping away excess and revealing what remains. And what remains is often simpler, quieter, and more honest than expected. The Buddha never promised that life would become easy. He promised that understanding would reduce suffering. Fasting, approached with awareness, supports this understanding at every level: biological, psychological, emotional, and existential. It teaches the mind that it does not need to cling so tightly, that safety is not found in constant satisfaction, but in trust. This trust changes everything. Decisions become clearer. Habits align more naturally with well-being. The nervous system no longer seeks escape as urgently. Pleasure becomes cleaner. Pain becomes more workable. The mind feels less divided against itself. And perhaps this is the deepest gift, the sense of coming home to oneself, not as an achievement, but as a remembering that the mind, when allowed to rest, knows how to heal, that the body, when not constantly interrupted, knows how to restore balance, that peace is not something to add to life, but something that emerges when what is unnecessary falls away. Fasting is not the destination, it is a doorway into a quieter brain, a steadier nervous system, and a more compassionate relationship with experience. What you carry forward from this doorway is not hunger, but awareness, not discipline, but understanding. And understanding once felt cannot be unseen. If this journey resonated with you, if something inside recognized itself in these moments of quiet truth, you are not alone. There are many paths that lead inward, and each unfolds in its own time. Here we explore them gently, with science, wisdom, and lived experience woven together. You are warmly invited to continue this journey with us by subscribing to Divine and Spiritual 0369, where we share more reflections on healing, consciousness, modern neuroscience, and ancient insight, all in service of a calmer mind and a more conscious life. Until then, move gently, listen deeply, and remember that stillness is always closer than you think.